This is not the news 80-year-old Marianne Lee wanted to hear.
I was okay before I heard that, to get the AstraZeneca. Now it makes me a little bit nervous.
Health Canada's authorization of
Just days ago, Health Canada approved Oxford-AstraZeneca's vaccine for all Canadians. Now a group of scientists the federal government goes to for vaccine advice says it's not recommending the shot for those over 65.
It is very confusing, right? Because there are countries that made a similar recommendation.
Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunization, or NACI, says it's due to limited information on the efficacy of this vaccine in this age group at this time.
So in the clinical trials, there weren't enough people who were over the age of 65.
Just over 90% of the participants in Oxford-AstraZeneca's clinical trials were under 55 years old. While NACI relies heavily on approved trial data, Health Canada says it's also factoring in real-world experience with the vaccine.
Since then, of course, the AstraZeneca vaccine has been used very widely in Europe and particularly in the UK, and thousands and thousands of folks over 65 have been successfully immunized.
In a recent study, researchers in Scotland vaccinated nearly 500,000 people with the Oxford-AstraZeneca shot, many of them elderly. Non-peer-reviewed results show that 4 weeks after the first dose, the risk of hospitalization fell by up to 85%.
And I know that NACI, is dynamically looking at the data as it comes from different places in the world, and they may well change their recommendation then.
But with doses arriving soon, decisions will have to be made about who gets what vaccine.
It puts the provinces in a very difficult position because they're going to ultimately have the final say here.
I'll be glad when either summer comes or I get a vaccine.
Adding, when the time comes, she'll take any vaccine her doctor recommends. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, we just heard from Dr. Isaac Bogosh, and we wanted to follow up, particularly Dr. Bogosh, on that point about how it'll be provinces, right, who have to decide what to do here. How will they balance the competing information? Whose advice would they follow?
It's going to be interesting to watch this play out because when you look at the vaccine programs roll out from coast to coast, most of them really are aligned with the NACI guidelines. So I imagine that most provinces will align with the NACI guidelines and stick to the under 65 recommendation. But quite frankly, you might see others that look at the real world data that was described earlier and say, you know what, I think there's enough evidence to vaccinate over 65. I'm very curious to see how the provinces will play this out.
Right, and that's kind of the question, right? I mean, shouldn't the real world data trump everything else if the goal here is to get shots in arms?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's helpful. I think we should look at the immunologic data. We should look at the clinical trial data. And again, there's some more clinical trial data coming out of the United States soon. And of course, you cannot ignore the real world data, especially from many parts of Europe, and especially the great data that's emerging from England and Scotland now that demonstrates that this looks to be pretty effective in the over 80 population.
Right. Okay. We'll continue to track it. Dr. Bogosh, thanks for that.
My pleasure.